Hi everyone, Lisa and Dan here from Fireside Strategic. We're on a mission to help business leaders achieve great results through human-centered strategy. In the Fireside Chat series, we're showcasing how leaders unite strategic and human thinking in leadership, and today are transcending the challenges of the COVID-19 crisis. Right now, we're excited to be chatting with Deborah Hanus, founder and CEO of Sparrow. Deborah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Lisa.
Could you tell us a little bit about Sparrow? What is it? What do you do?
Absolutely. So Sparrow is a software-based service that makes it simple for companies to provide their employees with leave. So I discovered this problem a couple years ago. All of my close friends from college started having children. There was this 6-month period where 6 of my friends had children, and all of them had to go through the process of like filing for short-term disability and paid family leave with insurance and the state. And usually there's private insurance, there's state insurance, there's federal paperwork, and all of it's very timing sensitive. Sometimes you can't file it before the first day you go out on leave, which for something like a maternity leave or a medical leave is absolutely crazy because that's probably the same day you're in the hospital. So when I'm talking to people who haven't gone through the process before, I generally say you can think of it as sort of like taxes level complicated. At which point, what we do from the employee side is you can think of it as like TurboTax relief paperwork. You give us the information up front, we make sure that everything gets filed on the right timeline, and make sure that we're available to answer any questions throughout the process. And then on the HR side, we'll also help them with like some of the payroll and support details as well.
Could you expand a little more on why it's as complicated as it is? I'm so curious about that because it really shouldn't be as complicated as taxes.
Yeah, it really shouldn't be. I agree. It's actually, in some ways, a lot of ways, actually more complicated than taxes, though. So I'd say that the problem is there are federal regulations, there are state regulations. It's sort of like you're combining like the compliance aspect of regulations and job protection, making sure that you're providing people the right kind of job protection given what state they're in. And lots of times those are things that can vary on a federal level and a state level. Sometimes they change frequently. And then on top of that, you're also combining that with insurance, which is another industry which is not known for very streamlined. So lots of times the way companies will make sure that someone has the pay that they need when they're out on leave, they'll usually apply for some sort of insurance like short-term disability. And then in the case of something like a medical leave or a pregnancy leave, that counts as disability. That's the way they provide paid leave. So you get 60% of your pay from the state or from a private insurance provider, and then your employer only needs to top that amount up. But interestingly, for small to medium businesses, like startups, often they don't know about the paperwork even. So they think in order to provide paid leave, they need to provide 12 weeks fully paid without the person working. Which can feel very, very expensive to a small startup. And so that's where you often end up in these situations where, I often talk to small startups where like, we provide 2 weeks paternity leave, which is like totally not enough. But they think that they can't afford anything more than that. But actually, if you think you can afford 2 weeks of paternity leave, a lot of states will actually, like California, Washington, New York, DC, Massachusetts is rolling out with this. A lot of states will actually provide part of that pay. So your employee is eligible to make a claim, they make the claim, then the employer only needs to top up 40% of that pay. So then if you're an employer who thought you could provide 4 weeks, probably you can actually provide 5 weeks of paid leave. So what Sparrow is able to do is by helping employers through this process that don't understand it, as well as HR, even the people who understand it, I think it's not like taxes. It's not the most fun thing they have to do. They would prefer for someone else to do it. So we help small to medium businesses. We'll help them be able to provide paid leave, and often to be able to provide much more generous paid leave than they thought that they could provide. And then for larger companies, I'd say the value proposition is really more the employee experience. So rather than the employee needing to go out and figure all of this out after they've come back from the hospital and they're sleep deprived, Instead, before they go out on leave, they can just talk to someone at Sparrow, and then, we manage the rest of that process for them.
I love that. There's so many different reasons for founding a company, and I love that you identified this very important unmet need, and you're doing the work that others don't want to do.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that we really enjoy about it, is that it is, there are sort of no losers with Sparrow. Like, HR gets to not do something that they never wanted to do in the first place. The people taking leave have a much nicer experience, and we get paid for the service, meaning that we can sustainably continue to be able to do that. But there's no one loses in this situation.
That is a beautiful, beautiful thing. Very human way of looking at business. And speaking of humanity, I mean, I'm just curious to learn more about your story. I have a sense of how you found out about this problem from your friends that were experiencing it, but I'm curious to learn more about the person behind Sparrow. Tell us a bit more about yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in rural Nebraska, actually. I went to college at MIT in the Boston area. I majored in computer science and neuroscience. Did my master's in computer science at MIT as well. And then I spent a year working in Cambodia as a Fulbright scholar, learning about how education translates into job creation. When I was at MIT, I think I hadn't done much engineering before I started at MIT. And I think that I really learned how to break down problems in a different way. And it changed the way I approached problems. And I think that definitely had a huge impact on me. And I was curious to learn more about the education system in Cambodia. So that's what I was doing there for a year, learning about how education sort of can translate into job creation. And then I came and worked as a software engineer at a company here in the Bay Area. I was there for about a year, and then I started a PhD at Harvard in machine learning applied to medical data. And then in the meantime, I was coming up on 30, and all of my friends started having children. And it seemed like, a really big need, and we were excited to do something about it.
Beautiful, beautiful. So many cool things about your background to dig into. I'm curious to learn a little bit more about the Cambodia piece, actually. When you talk about the transition from education to job creation, what did you learn in Cambodia about that?
Yeah, it's a very interesting situation, because I don't know I'll assume you don't know anything about Cambodian history. There was a genocide from 1975 to 1979 where the educated class was systematically killed. They lost about a third of their population. So this leaves their education system in a very interesting situation, in that when I was there, in like around 2010, they're in the situation where they, a lot of people really value education, but for an entire generation, the people survived because they were not educated and because they were good at manual labor. So sort of for an entire generation, there were not jobs created. So it's sort of actually, I'd say in some ways, sort of like a recession. In some ways, it's almost like a recession in the United States, except just like a very, very extreme example, where, there are lots of people actually, they really value education. They wanted their children to be educated. They went into debt so that their children could be educated. But then, so now you have all these educated people who are graduating, but they don't, there are no jobs available because people have not been creating jobs. So then it's sort of like especially important that they're able to go out and create those jobs. But sort of like starting a company in the United States as well, often with someone, if your family has gone into debt to pay for your education, you actually want a more secure role. You don't necessarily want to be going and starting a company where you may or may not be able to draw a salary for many years. So when I was there, they had things like startup competitions, but lots of times they were actually struggling to get people to the people who won to actually do their business, because that was sort of like enough of an honor that they could probably get some of the few jobs that were available. And if you're in debt, you sort of want that. You want to be able to pay off that debt right away. And I'd say it's very similar for entrepreneurs here in the U.S. It's much easier. Part of the reason we have these differences in part of the reason we have so much income inequality is I think it's much easier for someone who comes from a wealthier background to start a company, because sort of like their worst case scenario is like this totally fails and maybe they go home and are on their parents' couch. Worst case scenario. Whereas if instead you sort of have the same dream, the same drive, but your salary is responsible for your family and your parents, and then it makes it much more difficult to make that same decision to go out and try something new, because you're not just risking yourself, you're sort of risking everyone who you love. So I'd say that's in some ways it's almost the same situation, in that it's a little bit harder to make that decision to go out and create jobs because you have so many people relying on you.
The theme for me that I see between these two aspects of your journey, from learning about the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia to this moment now of helping people actualize leave, it's human capital development, and it's empowering people to have the choice to determine their relationship with work, what they really want it to look like, right? And so many people around the world have serious constraints placed on their ability to make those choices. And so if I were to kind of draw out a theme from your journey, I don't know if this resonates, but it's empowering people to have the choice to choose their relationship with work.
Yeah, I would say that is accurate. Yeah, I care a lot about, I'd say one, certainly, I'm excited about Sparrow because I think it can be a huge business, but also in addition to that, it is really like, I want to build a place where people can be happy coming to work, and I love making it possible for people to choose, if they want to stay in the workforce, how they want to stay in the workforce, and just have more power over that.
I love that. Really kind of using business to actually build a better world. I think that's really beautiful to see in action. So, changing gears a little bit, but not totally, the COVID-19 crisis has had a massive impact on American workplaces. I'm curious, how has that impacted Sparrow? How have you responded to the situation?
Yeah, it's definitely impacted us, although I think it's impacted us a little bit differently than some people. I can't take credit for this, but I think we actually turned out to be relatively well prepared for it, in that part of our team was remote before all of this. So I think when we sort of very suddenly everyone had a shelter in place and everyone needed to go work from home, we sort of already knew, we were already used to using Zoom. We were already very active on chat. We were used to writing things down so that things could be done asynchronously. So I say, to some extent, even though everyone has a ton going on in their personal lives, the business aspect of Sparrow has sort of managed to, and the cultural aspect has sort of just been really continuous on some level. It feels like business as usual. And then interestingly, I'd say the other aspect is some of these COVID-related leaves, they do count as medical leaves. So we are actually seeing an increase in business to some extent, so an increase in demand from our customers. I'd say probably from a sales perspective, it means that more large companies are closing than smaller companies, just because I think some of the smaller companies are a little bit harder hit. But it's nice. It is nice in that you are. For a lot of companies, their alternative is not managing this process, or spending a lot of time on it that they don't have. So, on some level, we are getting more business, but it is also working with Sparrow saves the company's money. So it's sort of, once again, it's nice in that everyone wins.
That's wonderful. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about your own story that when you were at MIT studying engineering, one of the main things that you learned was problem solving and how you approach problems. And it seems that you've done a very smart job approaching the problem of building your business, but also how to approach the current pandemic in a very smart way. Could you talk a little bit more about how you do problem solving? What did you learn there that you're now applying so intelligently to your business?
Yeah, that is a big question.
Sorry.
I think that I think that there are several aspects of it that I think have really. So I guess first of all, I think part of the reason it's a little bit of a difficult question for me to answer is at this point, I think a lot of the problem solving is sort of just, I don't even think of it when I'm doing it. So it's a little bit hard to sort of name it and know that that's what I'm doing. But I'd say there are some really nice, there are some things that I think that we're doing really well at Sparrow. One of which is we're sort of as a business, we're in this place where I'd say like we have product market fit, things are working, a lot of things are working really well. A lot of our interest recently has been inbound. So now things are working, but things can sort of stop working at any moment when you're trying to scale a business. You just need to not be looking at something, and then things can just go totally off the rails. So we are approaching things in a very sort of metric-based fashion, of making sure that we sort of, even from day one, even before we had a lot of data, making sure we understand, really how many leaves are we managing, how many people does it take to manage that many leaves. And when we're looking at our product roadmap for engineering, we try to quantify things in terms of like how much time will this save the team, how much time will this save people, and it's really sort of looking at the value add in our decision making and looking at how those will impact these metrics that we're watching, so that it's sort of, and I think just having a little bit of a numerical approach there can really do a lot to make you think, well, why has this number changed? And just do a little bit more debugging in that way.
I love that. It's such an engineering type way to manage a company, but it's so smart. Something as small as tracking how time is spent. So many businesses want to do that and should do that, but don't. And I love that you are. It sounds like you're really using data to build a better company, both for your customers, but also for your team.
Yeah, I'd say that's one of those things that only works if you have everyone on board, because everyone sort of needs to be tracking how their time is spent. And so that's something that I'm really grateful to the team for. When we implemented that, we did try to really make sure that we explain the why, which I would say is another big part of the company, making sure that everyone understands why we're doing things. I think people are much more comfortable tracking their time if they understand that it is so that their job will be more streamlined in the future than if they feel like someone wants to watch them constantly.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Autonomy is an important driver of how people work. And so if they have a sense that their autonomy is being undermined, number one, that can be a challenge. And then, number two, is it being undermined for a reason that they don't understand? That makes it even trickier. And so I think you really artfully handled that. I'm curious, so when you talk about building a team, it sounds like your why may be part of the hiring process, values may be part of your hiring process. I'm curious to learn, how did you go about building a team for Sparrow?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd say it's been a journey building the team for Sparrow, and the process has definitely changed a little bit. I'd say right now there are some like very specific things that we're hiring for. One of which is we try to hire. I'll start with the product specialist team. The product specialist team right now, they're the ones who are actually managing the leaves. They're half the company right now. And there are some things that we knew that we needed from them. Like we need people who are organized, kind of detail oriented. We need people who are really good at written communication as well as verbal communication. And we need people who are empathetic. Right now, you know, this is a super stressful time in your life. Even if you're going out on leave for a good reason, like, you're having a child, it's still stressful. Everything is changing. So you need people who can sort of understand where the other person is coming from and, talk them through the hard times. And then additionally, to some extent, throughout this whole process, there will always be something that we don't know. We certainly we really pay attention to all of the regulations and things like that. But really, sometimes a regulation will change or something like that, and you need to know what you don't know. So we also try to hire for that self-awareness as well. So I'd say, we hire, and I think that has really sort of spilled over to the rest of the team as well. Like right now, even when we hire engineers, we try to hire people who are self-aware, empathetic, communicate well, and are really excited about the mission. Like they also want to make a difference in the way that people work. And I think that has just been understanding that we're hiring for those specific things has definitely done a lot to, I think, just make sure that the team is all on the same page. And it's also absolutely wonderful in terms of managing the team as well. Because if you have a whole bunch of people who are really empathetic, really self-aware, actively seeking out feedback and trying to improve, that's, there's so much more that team can do together, working together, if everyone is trying to sort of has the same North Star in mind, the same mission, and is trying to get each other there. I think that it's really been a beautiful thing to watch.
That's beautiful. Love the way you put that. Curious to learn a little bit more. We don't have to get into super granular detail, but curious to learn a little bit more about how you would test for a quality like self-awareness in your hiring process. That can be a hard one to pick up. Some companies interview very quickly, right? So I'm curious, how do you look for a quality like that?
We try to ask questions about that only they would know. And to some extent, the goal is understanding how, and we'll try to ask questions like, I guess a reasonable example was something like, what's your greatest weakness? Mm-hmm. What are your greatest strengths? You can actually, they're fairly generic questions that you'll see in a lot of behavioral interviews, but you can actually tell a lot by how someone answers. And if someone gives an answer that is too superficial, we'll usually try to prod them into giving a little bit more of a self-aware answer. And there are a lot of people who, maybe their first answer will be like, this is always a very funny question for engineers, actually. It's not, for engineers, sometimes they'll be like, my greatest strength is I know Python. My greatest weakness is I'm not that good at Angular. And it's like, that's not what you were asking. And I think that sometimes, and lots of times, if you push someone who is self-aware, even if they had a pre-canned answer like that, usually they'll be able to tell you, my answer to that question is like, I struggle to stay organized. I know that if you work with me, you might not know that I struggle to stay organized because I really put a lot of effort into it. But some people are just naturally organized, whereas for me, it's taking like half my brain power to be able to look organized. So I think that, lots of times people, if you push people a little bit more, someone who is self-aware and understands some of these struggles that they're having, they'll be able to give you sometimes a very thoughtful answer about, things like that, things like, how they tend to interact with people and their communication style. So we try to ask questions like that, which sort of just help them be able to show how much they've thought about themselves and how they fit into the world.
That's beautiful. I love how you're really looking both at the human aspect, but also the technical aspect, and you're fitting a strategic need for your company, but also fitting that human need. Like you're building an incredible team that's aligned. And it sounds like you're doing a great job achieving that. So a question kind of to looking forward beyond COVID, what are some of your goals for Sparrow? What are you hoping that it becomes as you continue to look into the future?
That is a great question. I'm really excited for all the things that Sparrow can do. I think that right now we're providing a service that a lot of people, that is definitely meeting a real need. But I'd say leave management is one of those things where like it's just the farther I get into the problem, the more things I see where it's like, wow, really? Is no one doing this? So I think that probably we have only really scratched the surface in ways that, we can try to help people, manage. Not only, I think sometimes people when they hear leave, they think like maternity leave or parental leave, but we are managing all types of leaves. Lots of times a medical leave, like that can include like, I need to take a surgery. That can include maybe I have a drug problem and I need to go to rehab, or maybe I have severe anxiety, so I need to take time off for medical reasons. So I think that there are sort of like all of these different aspects and ways that we can help people who are I guess like Dan said, help people define their own relationship with work. And I think that there are a lot of ways that we'll be able to do that in the future.
I love that. Lots of exciting, tricky problems to dive into. So as we reach the end of our time together, one question that we love to wrap up our interviews with, like, look, we discussed lots of serious things. We talked about business. We talked about Cambodia. We talked about your background. But we've been in this COVID situation for a little while now. A lot of us have been locked up. What have you been doing for fun during this time? Outside of work, how are you staying entertained?
That is a great question. I'd say, like a lot of people, I probably had to go through this process of making sure that I had a lot of structure in my day. Because otherwise I think it's very easy to just, accidentally end up working all the time. I used to run a lot in high school. I've picked up running again, just making sure that I'm like, go out and move periodically. I also really enjoy reading. I listen to audiobooks at 2x speed, which is not great for my reading retention, but it means that I get like 40% of the book quickly. And I think that, just sort of being able to take some time out and make sure that, I spend time with friends and family has also been really helpful.
That's lovely. It sounds like you're really kind of doing what you can during a challenging time to stay active and get those 40% of books. Well, look, Deborah, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Both your story and the story of Sparrow are really inspiring. I definitely learned a lot, and I'm confident that everyone listening will as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.